Welcome to Cosplayland, I am Alice and today I'm going to show you how I made the accessories for my Yae Miko cosplay. I actually started this cosplay a couple of years ago and I have only been able to work on it on and off for the past few months. I thought it would be a good idea to show you the parts I have already finished and make them into mini tutorials if you are planning to make a similar build. This cosplay is fairly difficult, so I warn you it is gonna take me still a while to finish it, so if you are patient, you may be able to see some of the videos and some of the process of how I made it. This time, I will be showing you the whole painting process for my 3D printed pieces and how I make them look so smooth so I can actually paint them. I am not making a 3D printing tutorial today, and I will only mention that I had two types of prints for these projects. Those made with a filament printer and the ones made with a resin printer, which are far smoother. Both types of prints have their own pros and cons, and you will definitely need some experience with 3D printers to get the best results to start. I am aware I can get better quality results, but here I am working just with what I got, and remember, I made these 2 years ago when I was still starting to print stuff. Also, you do not need to print your pieces with clear resin, but I personally find it easier to create certain effects. There is a lot to do, so let's get started. The first step is going to be to assemble any multi-part accessories. You do not need to reinvent the wheel, and a good quality super glue will do the job. Once your piece is assembled, you will be able to sand any obvious imperfections or little failures in the prints. Use a coarse sandpaper for this part. It will get rid of the biggest lumps quickly. But remember, the lower the number, the quicker it sands, and it will also make the surface rougher, so be careful not to overdo it. You can see there are also some noticeable imperfections on the resin prints. And this is your warning, resin dust is harmful for your lungs. Keep your cats away, use a respirator, and open the windows. Gloves would also be a good idea, I actually used them later on. Unfortunately, the resin prints for my earrings warped, and I was not able to join them no matter how much I sanded them. This has to do with how I printed my pieces, but as I said, I am not going for a 3D printing tutorial today, and I am also not remaking these pieces because it is not going to be seen once I am wearing the wig. For my resin pieces, I carried on sanding, and once I was happy with them, I moved on to a finer grit sandpaper. This time I am using a 600 that will make my pieces smoother and will remove any little printing lines or any little imperfections I may have created with the previous grit. This whole process took a while. Remember to change your sandpaper once it gets too dusty, as it won't be as effective and you will take longer to just sand your pieces. Once you have sanded all the resin pieces effectively twice, it is time to wash them, and if you want, you can keep polishing them as much as you want. Even while they are wet, if you get a water-resistant sandpaper. Once you are done, don't forget to clean all your surfaces, both because resin is not good for you and because you want to get rid of all those little particles that will potentially stick to your pieces when you are painting them. You will need to dry your pieces very well before we get to the next stage. But before that, I somehow printed these parts without the flower, and now I have to go back to the printer and just wait for another print to happen in order to just be able to finish this, of course. So just for your entertainment, let's do another episode of 3D Printing is Easy. Get your files into the USB stick, connect to the printer, fill the tank with resin, wait for 4 hours to get the pieces printed, pray that it printed correctly, wash with isopropyl alcohol, remove the printing supports that you previously had to add with the computer, cure with UV light for an unspecified amount of time, and repeat the sanding process all over again. Thanks for playing with us today. Unfortunately, so far I only show you the resin pieces. The filament pieces, however, will need a bit more love, starting with a coat of filler primer so we can actually see what we are working with. And you will notice that these pieces are very irregular and they have lots of holes that we are going to have to fill. For the first pass, I will be using a generic filler, the one you use to smooth holes on the wall. Wood filler is also a good solution, but it is a bit more expensive. With a scraping tool, try to fill the biggest holes, being careful not to fill the details of your accessories. You see, this is what makes this process so long and so tedious. Trying to work around all those little details will take you some time. After a while, I realized adding a bit extra made the process quicker, as this material sands very easily and I was able to remove the excess on the details while the product was still wet. This saved a little bit of time. You can also smooth this material with your fingers if you need to. I used a fine grit sandpaper to remove the excess and I tried to smooth the surface as much as possible. Once the filler was dry, I washed my piece to remove any excess dust and added another layer of filler primer just to see if the surface was indeed smooth enough. Of course it wasn't, so it was time to sand again. And just so you understand it, filler primer is a thicker kind of paint that sticks very well to your surfaces and gets them a bit smoother. You can sand it as many times as you want to remove small imperfections, but you will still need to fill the bigger gaps. You can see it here, even after using wall filler and filler primer, this section is still very rough. So I kept washing, filling and sanding until I got a smoother result. Notice it is okay to sand all the way back to the original print, so don't be afraid of overdoing it, you just want it to be smooth. Some of the smaller imperfections were more difficult to cover, so I decided to use more precise tools. This one is called plastic putty and has been designed for miniatures. Same as before, you apply it to the gap and smooth it with a tool or with your fingers. For any difficult access spots, I use the stick to push the material into the recess. Once again, this material is very easy to sand, so don't be afraid to overdo it a little bit on the most problematic areas. You can sand it right down. There were, however, some bigger areas that would have taken too much product to smooth and were difficult to reach with the wall filler. For those, I decided to use UV resin. This was great to cover the grid surface of the middle area and also the inner parts of the medallion. You can use a piece of foam to smooth the surface and remove the excess. And please be very careful not to touch the resin until it is cured. Again, I should have used gloves just in case. Do not repeat my mistake, and better be safe than sorry. Once I was happy, I cured my resin with UV light. As this was, however, a big surface, I decided to use my curing station, which is a bit stronger and faster to use than a torch. I also decided to use UV resin on the most uneven surfaces of my prints. This created an even coat that I would be able to sand later on. However, keep in mind resin will find its way into the little crevices which could ruin the details of your print, so you need to go very carefully and very slowly. I sanded my piece once again with a fine grit paper, and this time I was very thorough to try and get it as smooth as possible. And I don't know, this seems to take a lot of time, but I think the results are worth it. But even here, it was not over. I washed it again, I primed it again, and I sanded it again as many times as I considered necessary until I was satisfied with the results. Keep in mind, it will take you forever to get a very smooth surface, so this will be very much how much time you are willing to spend on your print and how good is good enough for you. Finally, after one last wash, it was time to move on to the painting phase. You may want to paint your pieces in batches to save some time and paint, and I usually place mine on top of a foam board, but small pieces will simply fall off. If you want to avoid this, simply use cheap double-sided tape on the back so they are easier to move around and just take them down to wherever you want to be doing your painting. As I am using sprays, make sure you go to a well-ventilated area or you simply go outside. If you are gonna be moving them around, this is simply a great solution. And of course, you may not want to paint all the parts of your pieces. There may be some parts that either you want to keep clear or a different color, so you can use some masking tape or even some putty to just put on top of the areas you don't want to spray of whatever color you chose. Oh, and remember to check the weather forecast to make sure there isn't a storm going on. This is England, so that's always. The first layer you want to apply to your pieces is always a primer. Once again, this is a special type of paint that will stick to the surface and make it easier to paint. If you don't use a primer as a base, your paints will simply rub off easily with time. A good trick to get a vibrant gold color is to apply a base of brown first. If at any point you notice any dust or dirt in your prints, please feel free to sand and recoat the area again, because I know you love this part. Finally, I painted my pieces gold, and I know you're going to ask me, what brand did you use, Alice? The answer is, the brand doesn't matter, just find a color that matches your project. This one is Plastic Coat Gold Leaf, but I will definitely change it next time. Another trick to quickly add depth to your gold pieces is to apply oil paints to the recesses. I thinned my brown paint with solvents so it would flow better, and remember that once more, solvents are not good for you. Use a mask, open the windows, kick the cats out, and probably use gloves as well. I completely covered the pieces and all the areas that I wanted to be darker because this is gonna be our next step. Of course, you can use acrylic paints instead. If you want to, you can carefully paint the recess areas that you want to make darker. However, the trick I'm about to show you doesn't work with that type of paint, and you will need specifically oil paints in order to do this. The reason why I am not being careful to apply the paint is because I am going to remove all the excess with a cotton pad. That makes the inside a bit darker and the outside will still remain the same color as before. Simply wait a few minutes until it's a bit tacky, and then you can just easily remove the excess. For one of the flowers, I want to change the color to white, but you may notice after the layer of gold, the paint doesn't want to stick to the surface. This is very common with metallic paints. You can keep trying, but it's usually not very effective. The gold basically works as a water repellent and makes these ugly lines on the inside. The easy solution is, of course, more sanding. And it is a good idea to also use a primer paint on the first layer. You can buy primers in a bottle and they are not necessarily sprays. White is a very tricky color and it does not cover very well. This is how the piece looks after 2 layers of paint, 3 layers and 5 layers of paint. And I also decided to go a step further and make the color a little bit more interesting by adding a metallic shine layer using metallic filters or pearlescent paints. This paint is transparent and has tiny metallic pigments that will make your piece look extra magic. Once it dries, it will look super nice when you put it in the sun. I also added some finishing touches to other parts like the inner sides of the halo. Fortunately, darker colors like black only need a couple of coats for full coverage. Work carefully and slowly until you have covered all the parts that you need. If you remember, I masked a few pieces before and I am going to be painting those next. If you use clear resin, this process should be super easy. You only need to apply some type of ink paint, which is also clear. I use contrast paints here, but there are many other brands out there you can use, and if you add some silver on the back, they will look super nice. For my earrings, I am going to be doing something a bit more special, but I also started by painting the inside silver. Instead of using the resin gems that I 3D printed, I decided to make my own using UV resin. You can tint resin with alcohol inks to get a new color, and you can also add glitter to add an interesting effect to them. However, make sure you test them beforehand, as the process may not always go according to plan. After a lot of experimentation, mixing different quantities of resin, paint and glitters, I found the one I liked the most and created my own concoction. You will need a mold to pour all this resin to create your gems, and you will also need to apply UV light to your resin to make sure it sets. A little bit of super glue and your piece will be finished. The big flower on the chest follows exactly the same process. I painted the base silver as I did before, and I mixed some resins, but this time I wanted to create a gradient effect. So what I did was to pour a bit of clear resin in the middle, and then I added my purplish one to each petal. Being very careful to slowly mix the colors a little bit to create this very cool gradient effect. Make sure to clean any messy borders with a Q-tip before you cure the resin. And with this, all the accessories for my Yae Miko cosplay are complete. And these are all the accessory pieces I made for my Yae Miko. In total, I spent a full week as a full-time content creator working on these pieces, and this was only the sanding and painting process. I am not counting the printing time, which I did through several months throughout the year. I think I managed to show you quite a few tricks in this video which could be useful for your next project, and I actually can't wait to show you more of my own Yae Miko in the future because there is much more to come. And if you want to make sure you don't miss it, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much for watching, and I will be seeing you in the next adventure. Bye!